Hello Year 11, this is going to be a guide to paper 1, that is the reading paper from your language English GCSE. So you can see here the instructions that CIE put on the front. These are all very self-explanatory. The only thing that I would add here is that I really strongly recommend that you bring 3 different colour highlighter pens with you, because when you are extracting information from the passages, it will save you time if you can make sure you find it once and then can identify it and access it very quickly, rather than having to sort of go back and keep rereading. So yes, bring 3 highlighter pens please to your exam. Right, let's move on to the actual questions themselves. So question 1, A, fairly straightforward really. You'll notice here that the command word used at the start is give. Now if CIE asks you to give or identify, that means that they are encouraging you simply to lift the word or short phrase directly from the text. In other words, you do not need to put it into your own words. So give or identify just means lift the information from the text and show that you know what it's referring to. So you will probably remember from having done this paper and looked at it at various different points over the last 2 years, the answers here very straightforwardly: passenger pigeon and dodo. Okay, and if you get both of those, you get 1 mark. So let's move on to 1B. Now this is a little bit different. You can see already that the command word has changed. Here it is explain. I'm going to scroll up a bit. Explain. Now explain means you have to use your own words, and CIE make this abundantly clear by saying in nice bold letters, use your own words. Okay, so you know what you're dealing with here. Now, how do we actually approach this question? Well, you'll notice that there are 2 marks available for each part, and there's a reason for that. It's because it requires a little bit of thought and you have to give the full answer. So how do you make sure you do that? Well, I suggest quite a sort of methodical approach to this, and that means looking at each word in turn. Okay, so if we look here, it's asking you to explain what candidates for de-extinction means. So I would begin by thinking, well, what is a candidate, or what are candidates? Candidates are possible choices. Okay, and then I'd look at the second part, de-extinction, and obviously if something is made extinct, it dies out. So if it's made de-extinct, it is brought back to life. So then we bring all of that together. Candidates for de-extinction means possible choices to be brought back to life. We might want to, just for clarity, add and show that we know what the text is about, add in a little bit of contextual detail and say possible choices of extinct species to be brought back to life. Okay, and that would just make it super clear. Right, let's apply the same method to B part 2. Here it asks you to explain what the text means by not just distant dreams. So again, let's go through word by word and see what that could mean. Well, not just, I think we could say means more than. And then let's look at distant. Something is distant, it is far away or far off. And dreams, in this context, is a hope, and we might even say an unrealistic hope. Something's just a dream. It might be a sort of slightly unrealistic hope, perhaps. Okay, so let's bring all of that together, and what we get is more than, far off, unrealistic hopes. Okay, and I think if we put that, we would guarantee ourselves the 2 marks. And what CIE actually say in the mark scheme is that if you give a partial answer, you only get 1 of the 2 marks. So for instance, if here you missed out the sort of far away element and simply said more than unrealistic hopes, they might only award you 1 mark. Okay, so you really need to make sure that you are engaging with and explaining the full phrase here. That's really important. Okay, let's scroll down to question 1C. Now here it says, reread paragraph 3, and in case you don't feel like counting, it actually guides you towards the first few words of that paragraph. So let's have a look at that. Paragraph 3. Scientists working on such projects estimate that a variation of the first new woolly mammoth, which disappeared some 4,000 years ago, may soon be born. They hope these animals will play a role in slowing or reversing the effects of climate change. Okay, so fairly straightforward here again, but what it's actually checking that you can do is find the relevant information, but also just to make a little bit of sort of light inference, okay, because you're having to slightly read between the lines or infer about what it is that might be exciting for scientists about this, okay. Now, it should be fairly clear, hopefully. I think the first thing probably that scientists are probably excited about is simply the fact that woolly mammoths have been extinct for around 4,000 years. Okay, so obviously that would be quite a huge achievement to sort of to bring them back, and so that might be something that scientists would find exciting. And let's keep going and see. And then in the second sentence it says they, so that's the scientists, hope these animals will play a role in slowing or reversing the effects of climate change. Now, who doesn't want that? Okay, so I think that would also be something that scientists might find exciting. So then we would go back to our script, and what are the two reasons scientists might be excited by the possible birth of a woolly mammoth? Well, firstly, the fact that woolly mammoths have been extinct for 4,000 years, and secondly, the fact that doing so might help in the fight against climate change. Okay, so you're picking out the relevant information and you're making a small bit of inference about that information as well. Okay, fairly straightforward. And remember, the command word is give, so you don't need to worry about putting it in your own words. You can again simply lift from the text. Okay, let's move on to 1D now, and it asks you to reread paragraphs 4 and 5 and identify two main tasks that scientists will need to complete in order to breed the hybrid. Identify, again, means simply you need to pick out the information. You don't necessarily need to reword it. So let's have a look at those paragraphs 4 and 5, and here we go. It says the basic idea behind how it works that scientists would first retrieve DNA from the remains of a woolly mammoth that had been preserved for centuries in the frozen tundra and use that to alter the DNA of modern Asian elephants. So already we actually have the two main tasks that the scientists need to do. They would need to retrieve DNA from the remains of a woolly mammoth and use that to alter the DNA of modern Asian elephants. And we put one of those in here, one of those in there, and you have your 2 marks. Okay. Now, the next one, perhaps a little bit trickier because they are asking you to explain. So this time you do need to reword things and put them into your own words. You'll notice that there are 3 marks available, and obviously that means they are asking you to find 3 different reasons why Asian elephants were chosen for Project Mammoth. So we would keep reading all of these, and I'm not actually going to read through it. I will just show you where the where the answers sort of lie. The first reason Asian elephants are chosen is that they are closely related to mammoths. So we can see that here. The 2 species are so closely related. So that's the first reason. The second reason, and it's sort of linked to that one, but it is on the mark scheme as a separate reason, is that they could successfully breed with one another. So here, because remember the question is asking you why were Asian elephants chosen for Project Mammoth, we would need to sort of, again, slightly reword it. We can't say they could successfully breed with elephants because it's the elephants that we're talking about. So we would have to say they could successfully breed with mammoths, and that would be our second possible reason as to why Asian elephants were chosen. The third the third reason is that the Asian elephants are under threat of extinction. Okay, so we can see that here, that they are endangered Asian elephants. Okay, and so it would help to protect endangered Asian elephants. Okay, so that's a third reason, and there we go. It's that straightforward, really. It's about reading carefully, understanding what it is you're being asked to find, in this case, why the Asian elephants were chosen, and again, perhaps making a little bit of inference and being able to put those into your own words. So just to recap, we would have something along the lines of the fact, number one, that they are closely related to mammoths, secondly, that they have the potential to breed with mammoths, and thirdly, the fact that they are themselves, Asian elephants, under threat of extinction, and that this project could increase their chances of survival. And that way we would gain all three of the available marks. So we move on now to 1E, question 1. It goes on and on. It's the gift that keeps on giving. So this one says, reread paragraphs 6 and 7 and using your own words. So that is key. It's in bold. You need to use your own words here. Explain why some people disagree with Project Mammoth. So we would go to the text and look at the relevant paragraphs here. We'd reread those and then consider why it is that some people disagree with this project. Now, we do need to, as I said, use our own words here. So let's have a think about what this might look like. If we read it, it says, the project is not without its critics who claim the idea is no more than a gimmick. Okay, so here we have our first criticism, if you like, of this project, or a reason why some people disagree with the project. They say that it is a gimmick. Now, we need to put this into our own words. Okay, so what is a gimmick? Well, it's a sort of slightly hollow, meaningless stunt, really, that has no genuine practical application. Okay, so we need to be pretty confident with defining some of these words. Okay, and if you're not sure, then you could at least try to work it out by thinking, for instance, well, what type of word is it? Okay, we can work out that it's a noun. Okay, so it's a thing, and no more than. So that suggests that it's a thing of maybe low quality. Okay, and this way, by sort of reading carefully and closely, we could perhaps start to work it out. Even if you don't know exactly what a gimmick is, you might be able to work out by figuring out that it's a noun, by sort of looking at the context. It's no more than a gimmick. You might be able to sort of at least give yourself a good go of sort of working out what it means. Okay, so that's the first reason. And then note there's a comma. And I noticed this actually because it's quite useful to think about what the function of a comma is here. It's sort of separating bits of information. And now we want, don't we, multiple bits of information. We need 3 different reasons why people might disagree with Project Mammoth. So we can use that comma to sort of help us understand that actually what's going on here is that we're being given a further reason. Okay, and this reason is that it is seducing scientists into thinking they are saving the world. Seducing scientists into thinking they're saving the world. Well, how are we going to express that in our own words? Maybe something along the lines of fooling scientists into thinking that this is the answer to all of Earth's problems. So you'll see that I've taken that word seducing and I've kind of thought, well, what's it actually telling us? What information is that giving us? And really, it's telling us that that people believe that it's sort of fooling the scientists, or it's sort of leading them down a kind of a path that they shouldn't really be going down. And it's into thinking that they are saving the world, so that this is the answer to all of the Earth's problems, might be a way of putting it. Now, obviously, a word like scientists, you don't need to find another way of saying that. You don't need to sort of say, I don't know, laboratory dwellers or anything like that. A scientist is a scientist, so you stick with that. Whereas something like a gimmick or seducing, that's what they're testing your ability to understand. Okay, so it's about using your judgment when you think about which words you need to actually put into your own words. So we've got 2 of our reasons. And then, rather than a comma, we've got here, haven't we, the word and. Now, and joins together, doesn't it, parts of a sentence. So that again might be a clue that after the and, we've got another point that we could use to help us answer this question. So let's see what it says. And distracting us from guaranteeing our planet's biodiversity. Wow, okay, so distracting, we need to think about, don't we, first of all? So it's sort of perhaps preventing scientists or stopping scientists from guaranteeing, well, from, you know, sort of shoring up, or from saving, we could even say, our planet's biodiversity. Well, biodiversity, you hopefully again could work out even if you weren't sure, because you'd think, well, look at that word. What's it actually mean? Bio, obviously to do with biology, to do with the earth. Diversity, you probably know, is the sort of the range of things, I suppose. So biodiversity is the range of different species. So it's distracting us from guaranteeing our planet's biodiversity. So it's preventing scientists from working on the problem of extinction. Okay, so that would be our third point. And then we'd keep reading if we don't need a fourth point, but there is a fourth point in here: for future generations with promises of being able to fix mistakes later. And really, another way of saying that might be to say that actually this project is excusing our current environmentally destructive actions. Okay, so again, this question, or this part of question 1 rather, is asking you to show your understanding of some of these, you know, quite tricky words, but there are ways of doing it. And I think being careful, paying attention to detail, and really thinking carefully, you know, what type of word is it? What is the context? What is the broad sense of this? That might help you work out some of the more specific words that you need to be able to define. Okay, then obviously we would simply go back to here and, in our own words, put in 3 reasons why some people disagree with Project Mammoth. Okay, so now we get to the final part of question 1. We've got all the way to question 1F. And this is also known as the summary question. You'll notice immediately it says read text B. Okay, so we are now moving on to the second of the 3 passages that you are given with this paper. I give you the title, so check you're reading the right one. And then it says, according to text B, what made Liuba such a remarkable and precious scientific specimen, and what did scientists hope to discover by studying her? Well, let's think for a moment what the summary question is asking us to do. Okay, so we've got this question here, and what we need to do, what you need to do, is to extract the relevant information. Okay, so we can see immediately what that relevant information is going to be. What made her a remarkable and precious scientific specimen? That's one chunk of relevant information. And secondly, what did scientists hope to discover by studying her? Okay, so that is the second lot of relevant information that you're going to have to pick out. Now, you are also being tested here on your ability to put things into your own words, so to show your understanding. Your ability to group information logically, okay, and also to write in a formal and concise fashion. In other words, not wasting words. Okay, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But let's focus briefly on this idea of grouping things logically, because I mentioned right at the start of this video the need for highlighter pens, and I think this is where they would really begin to come into their own, because I would suggest that while you are reading the passage, you highlight in one colour, and you can highlight this as well here, so you say highlight this bit in yellow, okay, and then you would go through the passage and you would find all of those things that made Liuba a remarkable and precious scientific specimen, and you would highlight them in yellow, okay, as precisely as possible, not, you know, painting the whole page, but just picking out those, or the information that is relevant to that part of the question, okay, and then perhaps in another colour, let's say blue, you would find the relevant information for this part of the question. What did scientists hope to discover by studying her? Okay, and then obviously when you are writing your answer, you're not going to sort of give one of these points and then one of these points and then go back to this one and go back to that one. In fact, this would divide, I think, very neatly into two very concise paragraphs. One on the first part of the question and one on the second part of the question. Now, I'm going to have a look actually this time, rather than at the passage itself, because I think that would take just too long to sort of go through and pick out all of the information. Show you the mark scheme for this question. Okay, so you can see here, this is what your examiner will have in front of them. Again, they have the question written out for them, all of the information that you're given, and then underneath that, they've got what's called indicative reading content. Okay, you don't need to worry too much about that. But it says here, candidates may refer to any of the points below. Okay, and look, they've actually divided it as the question is divided, haven't they? And that is because hopefully your answer will also split into two along these lines. Okay, so here you can see 6 reasons that made Luba such a remarkable and precious scientific specimen, and here we've got another 6 reasons of what scientists hoped to discover by studying her. Now, all of these are lifted directly from the text. Okay, so the examiner will know very, very clearly if you have simply copied whole phrases from the text. Okay, and they will drag your mark down as a result. Okay, so what you are aiming for with this is a series of points which are very clearly identifiable as these, but are put in your own words. Okay, so let's just give one example of what that might look like. So in the text itself, it says only a handful of mammoths have ever been found. So you don't want to use that exact same phrase. So, for instance, you might change it to something along the lines of very few mammoths have ever been discovered. Okay, so that way you've sort of shown that you understand what only a handful means, very few, and instead of saying found again, you've said discovered. Okay, so it's not, as though you have to sort of go through every single word and change it, and mammoths obviously would stay the same, but you do need to change it sufficiently to show that you have understood it. Okay, so let's go back to this. So the way to do this really, it involves quite careful planning. Okay, so you would go to the passage. In fact, let's have a quick look. This is it. As I say, I'm not going to read through it, but with your 2 highlighter pens, you would very, very carefully, slowly, calmly, methodically go through the text and begin to highlight the relevant points in the 2 different colours. Okay, once you've done that, you'd go back to here and you'd start to write up your answer. Okay, remembering to try and group similar points together. A few tips about this, which you hopefully will remember from your English lessons. Firstly, you do not want an introduction or a conclusion. Okay, so at no point would you say anything along the lines of, there are many different reasons that Luba is a remarkable and precious scientific specimen. Some of these reasons are, okay, you launch straight into it, okay, no introduction, no conclusion, okay. You also want to absolutely avoid any commentary, okay, and what I mean by that really is giving any kind of opinion or a sense of, oh, this is really good, or this is really bad, or it's sad that this is happening, or, I really hope that scientists will be able to discover X, Y, Z. Not at all the tone that you're going for. What you want is something clear, concise, factual. Okay, it could be, if you want to sort of compare it to something, it would be a bit like it should be, once you've written your summary, a bit like reading something from a very dry textbook. Okay, that's what they want. And so therefore they also want you to avoid any informal language. I would suggest that you sort of write things out fully rather than using contractions, so did not rather than didn't, for instance, okay, just to make sure that it is as formal as possible. And in terms of the number of points you want to include, so you might assume that given that it says there are 10 marks available for the content of your answer, that you need 10 points. Actually, strictly speaking, you don't, okay? But you do need, I would say, a minimum of 8 points, okay? And I will talk a little bit more about why in a moment, okay? But you should aim for between 8 and 10 different points to answer that question, okay? Right, let's have a quick look again back at the mark scheme, and you will see that this is what the examiner will decide your mark based upon. Now, to get into this top band, so to get 9 or 10 out of 10 for your reading, in other words, for your identification of the key points relevant to the question, it says a very effective response that demonstrates a thorough understanding of the requirements of the task, demonstrates understanding of a wide range of relevant ideas. Excuse me. Now, that's why we don't necessarily need 10. Okay, I think from what CIE have said, 8 would count as being a wide enough range to access that top band. Okay, and it says points are skillfully selected to demonstrate an overview. So again, I think what this means is that really you need a balance of different points. You don't want to focus too heavily on just one side of this question. Okay, so it can't all just be about what made her a remarkable and precious scientific specimen. It has to include both parts. Okay, now I should also say it won't necessarily be that you have a sort of a two-part question like this. It might just be one thing, in which case that's fine as well, okay? But if it is two parts, in a way it makes your life a little bit easier because it helps you with grouping your points. Now, the last thing I'm going to look at is how the examiner determines your mark for writing, and that's out of 5. So obviously you've got mark out of 10 for reading, mark out of 5 for writing. So the summary question is out of 15 overall. And it says a relevant response. Okay, so that means you are only choosing information that actually answers the question, that is expressed clearly, so it's clear what you're saying, fluently, so in other words, your writing has a good sort of flow to it. You don't want each point in its own sentence. You know, you probably want to be using things like bracket, comma sentences. Okay, so revise those if you're not sure about those, because that will help with your fluency, and mostly with concision. Okay, so in other words, concisely. Okay, and again, bracket, comma sentences and being able to sort of to handle subclauses generally within your sentences will be very, very helpful in this regard. Okay, the response is well organized. That's what I've talked about in terms of grouping similar points together. The response is in the candidate's own words where appropriate, using a range of well-chosen vocabulary which clarifies meaning. So again, putting the information into your own words and actually having, as far as possible, the vocabulary to be able to do that. And then finally, spelling, punctuation, and grammar are mostly accurate. Okay, so SPAG actually is something that they are looking at here. And if it is all over the place, you are probably not going to get into that top band. Okay, so hopefully that has provided a bit of clarity on the summary question. Okay. Okay, so having worked through question 1, obviously we move on to question 2. Now you'll notice that this refers to text C, so that is the third of the 3 texts that you are given with this paper. Question 2a asks you to identify a word or phrase from the text which suggests the same idea as the words underlined. Okay, so then they give you a sentence with a word or short phrase underlined, and you need to find a synonym for that from within the text. Okay, so really this is checking your ability to understand what the words mean and to sort of be able to skim through the passage and identify them. So the first thing we're looking for is something that suggests broken suddenly. Natalia was expecting the quietness of their walk to be broken suddenly. So let's go to the text and we would start reading it. We're nearing the end of our side street and I assumed the silence of our walk would be shattered by the bustle along the tramway. Aha, there we go. Okay, that sounds, doesn't it, like something that would fit the bill. So we would go back here, broken suddenly, shattered. Yes, that means the same thing. So really straightforward. All you need to do is to write in the word shattered. Okay, you won't lose marks if you put in the silence of our walk would be shattered, but really all you actually need is the synonym for the bit that is underlined. Okay, so save yourself some time, earn yourself a mark, and it's as easy as that. Okay, the second one. Natalia slowed herself down and made herself as tall as possible before refusing to go any further. Okay, so we're going to go back to the text and we're going to look for something that, broadly speaking, means slowed herself down and made herself as tall as possible. So let's see, is there anything here? We got nothing, blah, blah, blah. Hazy moon, grandfather stopped, looked up and down the street, turned left. Okay, so I don't think there's anything in there. It's not far now. He said, no, nothing there. I caught up with him long enough to see that he was smiling. Nothing there. Then we get to this sentence. I drew myself up and stopped. Okay, well, now we might be getting somewhere. I drew myself up and stopped, slowed herself down, and made herself as tall as possible. Yep, I think that fits the bill, doesn't it? I drew myself up. Okay, so that's the making herself as tall as possible, and stopped. That obviously refers to the sort of, slowing herself down. There we go, and then we sort of keep skimming through the text. What we're looking for now is something to suggest that her grandfather spoke to her in a low, angry voice. Let's see. So you'll notice, they don't point out exactly where this information is anymore. They're not being quite as kind in this question. You have to actually go and find it. Let's keep reading then, where we got to. Drew myself up and stop. I'm not going any further until you tell me. He turned to look at me indignant. Lower your voice, you fool, he hissed. Aha, okay. Lovely sibilant sound there. And do you think hissed could mean spoke to her in a low, angry voice? I would say so. And again, we don't need to put much more information in here than simply the word hissed, and you've got your third mark. Finally, the homeless person was fast asleep. Hopefully you're getting the idea now. We're looking for something to suggest that the homeless person was fast asleep, and immediately my eye actually was drawn to this word beggar, obviously a synonym for a homeless person, sleeping so soundly that I would have thought him dead, fast asleep. So actually, the mark scheme says just so soundly would get you the mark. I might be tempted in this case to say a little bit more, sleeping so soundly that I would have thought him dead, perhaps, because that really, I think, captures the fast asleep bit. But either way, if you put in so soundly, you would get the mark. Okay, so hopefully you can see that for question 2A, it is simply about skimming through the text and looking for things that mean, within the context of the passage, something along the lines of the phrases that are underlined here. Okay, so should be again for fairly easy marks, but as ever, it is about taking care. Okay, not rushing it. So you can skim read, but you need to be careful. You need to check, make sure, does it make sense then? Okay. Okay, so moving on to 2B, and actually this is an interesting sort of inversion of the of 2A, because this time you are actually finding synonyms for words that are used in the text, and helpfully they actually give you the little chunk of text that they want you to look at. So let's have a look. Using your own words, explain what the writer means by each of the words underlined. I peered out into the street. On the other side there was a street lamp with a dying bulb. I was opening my mouth to say what, and then I saw it. Half a block from us, an enormous shadow was moving along the street. Now, there are two things to think about here. Firstly, you need to define the word as it appears in the context that it is used here, and you need to do it as precisely as possible. Okay, so let's start with the as precisely as possible bit, and we're actually going to start with the word enormous. Now, it says here, half block from us, an enormous shadow was moving along the street. Now, you could put in the word big, but it would get you 0 marks, because enormous does not mean big. Enormous means something huge or vast or gargantuan, okay? And that is what I mean by being precise, okay? Big is not, completely incorrect, but it is not precise enough to get you the mark, okay? So really think carefully. Is the definition that you've given accurate and precise, okay? And you also need to, as I said, think about the word within the context. And so for this one, actually, the word dying is quite a useful example. It says, on the other side, there was a street lamp with a dying bulb. Okay, so obviously, the word dying could refer to the passing away of a human being. But if you put passing away, you would not get the mark, because it's referring to a dying light bulb. So instead, you'd need to give a definition that showed that you understood that and the context in which the word is being used. So, for example, a word like fading or slowly going out would fit better. Okay, and if you said passing away, not that I'm sure you would, but if you did, you again wouldn't get the mark, because it would show that you hadn't really understood the context. Okay, peered, quite straightforwardly, sort of, stared, looked intently, something like that would work for peered. Okay, remember, you can. It doesn't have to be a single word. It can be a short phrase that conveys the same meaning as well. Okay, let's have a look now at question 2C, which asks you to use one example from the text below to explain how the writer suggests Natalia's experiences and feelings that night. And for this one, clearly you are going to have to use your own words. And this is the short piece of text that you need to look at and choose one example from. So, I peered out into the street. On the other side, there was a street lamp with a dying bulb. I was opening my mouth to say what, and then I saw it. Half a block from us, an enormous shadow was moving along the street. So hopefully here it should be fairly self-evident which words or phrases are particularly sort of useful, I suppose, in helping us understand Natalia's experiences or feelings that night. So I'm going to show you the mark scheme in a moment, but just, if we look right at the start, I peered out into the street. So this is on the mark scheme, this idea of peered out. And you might immediately start thinking, well, how does this help suggest her experiences or feelings? I mean, if you peer at something, it, I think, conveys, doesn't it, a little bit of perhaps sort of uncertainty or even a little bit of anxiety, perhaps. It's not a confident staring out into the street necessarily, just a sort of a peering. You're kind of a little bit cautious, maybe, if you're simply peering, and that might then therefore tell us a little bit about her feelings. Perhaps she feels a little bit apprehensive, a little bit nervous. She's in quite an unusual situation, isn't she? Walking through these sort of almost deserted streets in the middle of the night. And peered helps convey that a little bit. Now, there are 5 other examples that are on the mark scheme within just this short bit of text. So let's have a look at what those are. In fact, just very quickly, I'm going to show you how you can be awarded 3 marks. So it says here, award 3 marks for an appropriate example. So that is an example that is on the mark scheme, and we'll look at these more fully in a moment. So pick an appropriate example and then give a comprehensive explanation which shows understanding of how the writer suggests Natalia's experiences and feelings. Now, if you give an attempt at an explanation, then you can get 2 marks. And if you give an attempt at an explanation which shows awareness of her experiences and feelings rather than an understanding, then you'll get 2 or 1 marks respectively. Okay, so the key here, really, what all of this means in a nutshell, is simply that you need to make sure that your explanation is sufficiently detailed and that it really does actually help you answer the question, that in this case it does tell us, you can explain what it tells us about her experience or feelings. Okay, so let's have a look. I'm not going to look at all of these, but you can have a quick look and see which phrases made it onto the mark scheme and what was said about them. So if we just take one of these, let's say enormous shadow, and just look how much sort of information can be squeezed out of these two words. Okay, so obviously, you would phrase this in your own words, but broadly speaking, I think the idea is that the phrase helps convey Natalia's amazement or surprise because of the sheer size of the thing. Now, obviously, that's what the word enormous is doing here. It's conveying the massiveness of this elephant, and we need to pick up on that and look at that in detail. Okay, so that shows her amazement at the size of it, and then looking at the word shadow, I suppose, and that suggests something about her experience as well. It suggests that she doesn't recognize the elephant at first. Okay, and that's why she describes it as this sort of in this unspecific fashion, as a shadow. She doesn't say an enormous elephant, it's an enormous shadow. So that builds up perhaps a little bit of tension and anticipation, because, what is this shadow? What is this thing moving through the street? Okay, so just two words, enormous shadow, but there is an awful lot that you can actually say about those words. Okay, and have a quick look at the others as well. You can pause the video if you want and sort of work out what's being said about these phrases, because it'll help you, I think, to sort of see what is required. Now, in terms of how you actually answer it, my suggestion would be to follow this format. Okay, so in here, you take the word or phrase that you want to explore. Remember, you only need one example. Write it out, colon, and then give your explanation, okay? And try to go into quite a bit of specific detail, because that will help you sort of pick up the 3 marks, hopefully. Okay, let's move on to question 2D now, and there are 15 marks available for this question, so we're moving into slightly sort of chunkier answers, I suppose, being required at this stage. So in question 2D, this is what we sometimes refer to as the writer's effect questions. You'll notice it's divided into 2 parts. Okay, it sort of guides you towards firstly paragraph 9 and then paragraph 12. Now, it then goes on to ask you to explain how the writer uses language to convey meaning and to create effect in these paragraphs. Choose 3 examples of words or phrases from each paragraph to support your answer. Your choices should include the use of imagery. So, just to be very, very clear about this, what this means, choose 3 examples from each paragraph, is that you want, in total, 6 mini paragraphs, but they have to be evenly divided between paragraph 9 and paragraph 12. Okay, so you'd want 3, maybe 4 if you were, if you have time, and then 3 or 4 paragraphs, mini paragraphs for this one. Okay, you must not focus entirely on one paragraph and then neglect the other one. Okay, and you even don't want a sort of an imbalance between them. So, what's the format for this? The way that we suggest you do this is very, very sort of straightforward, and it makes it easy for the examiner to see what you have done. So the first thing to do is to select the words or phrases that you are going to look at, and obviously think about those, and we'll talk a little bit about what you can say about them. But in terms of how you write this answer out, I suggest you do it this way. So you give your piece of evidence, put it in quotation marks, okay, and just put it here. It'll be a short phrase, and then colon, and then you give the meaning and effect in full sentences after it. Okay, so it might take up, let's say, these first 3 lines. Okay, you have your quotation, your piece of evidence, you put it in quotation marks, colon, dot, dot, and then in full sentences, the meaning and effect. Okay, and you do that 3 times for paragraph 9, 3 times for paragraph 12, or whatever the paragraph numbers are that you are asked to look at. So what kind of things should you be picking up on, and what should you be saying about them? Well, let's have a quick look at paragraph 9. Okay, so this is when the narrator is sort of describing the kind of the realization, I suppose, that what she is seeing is an elephant. So at first I thought it was a tram, but its shape was too organic, too lumpy, and it was going far too slowly for that, making almost no noise. It was swaying up the street with an even momentum in a rolling motion that was drawing it away from us like a tide. And every time it rocked forward, something about it made a soft, dragging sound on the rails. As we watched, the thing sucked in air and then let out a deep groan. So there are plenty of things in here that you can talk about, and I'm going to show you the mark scheme in a moment so that you can have a look at what is on there. But one thing that should immediately jump out, hopefully, is just because you have been looking at them for years in your English lessons, similes and metaphors, okay, and personification as well, I suppose. Imagery, in other words. Okay, so when you see, for instance, this phrase was drawing it away from us like a tide, okay, immediately alarm bells should be going off and you should be thinking, okay, that's a simile. And if there is imagery in the paragraph, you can firstly guarantee that it will appear on the mark scheme, okay, because they specifically would like you, they say, to try and include the use of imagery in your choices, okay? And also, you should feel quite confident that there are plenty of things that you can say, because imagery, the whole point of imagery, is precisely as the name suggests, to sort of create a picture in your mind. And your job at this stage is to really explain in detail what exactly that picture is. Right, so let's have a look now at the mark scheme, and you can see there are plenty of choices. All of these are for paragraph 9, and then all of these are for paragraph 12. Okay, so there are plenty of things that you can pick from, and it might be worth just sort of pausing this video at some point and looking through very clearly what they have chosen. Okay, and that might help you get a feel for the kind of thing that you should be trying to pick out when you come to write your answer. So, what do you do? What should you do in terms of how you answer it? Well, first thing to do is to give a brief, maybe 1-2 line overview of the overall effect of the paragraph. Okay, so the one we've just read says on the mark scheme that the overview or the overall effect is that the elephant's movement is described in terms reminiscent of a boat on the sea, as if travelling from far away. Or they say it could, the overview or the general effect could be that it is as though the elephant is moving with a powerful natural movement of the sea itself. Okay, so there are kind of various comparisons between the elephant and sort of the motion of the sea. Or rather, it might suggest that the elephant looks somewhat incongruous in the context of the city, as though it's a little bit out of place within the context of the city. Okay, so there are really not fixed answers for this one. Okay, as long as you say something that is sort of sensible and that is based on the language that is actually used in the paragraph, it will probably be fine. Okay, so don't think it has to sort of mirror exactly what is on the mark scheme, because obviously you won't know what that is, but do try to be in your overview, do try to sort of base it on what is actually in the paragraph itself. Okay, so now let's look at the kind of thing that you might write. I'm going to look at this example. Okay, so in the paragraph it says that there was a rolling motion that was drawing it away from us like a tide. That is the elephant. Now the key thing here, what not to do, and I've noticed this quite a lot in mocks and just in answers that I've seen over the years, you do not need to define obvious words. Okay, so you should not be saying, for instance, about like a tide, something along the lines of, this is when the sea goes onto and away from the beach. Okay, that is unnecessary. All right, you do not need to give those sort of very literal definitions. Instead, you could say something along these lines. The phrase or the simile, like a tide, helps us see that the elephant is moving with a slow but consistent and unstoppable rhythm. This suggests that the elephant is a force of nature that cannot be controlled, hurried, or alarmed. Okay, so I've really thought about what this simile, what effect it creates. Okay, I haven't just given a very literal definition. I've thought about the effect that it creates and the sort of the image that it produces in my mind. Okay, and honestly, as long as you're doing that, as long as you're actually thinking carefully about the language and sort of trying to explain that, get that across to the examiner, you can be quite creative with this question, really. Okay, and there's, I think, quite a lot of leeway in terms of the kinds of things you're saying, as long as it, is sort of vaguely sensible and is based on the actual language itself. Okay, so let's just recap what the answer would look like. You would put your overview here, just a brief overview of what's going on in the paragraph as a whole. You would then put here the short sort of word or phrase, so like a tide, for example, you'd put it in quotation marks because it's a quotation from the text, colon, and then you would give the sort of the meaning and then the effect. Okay, and remember, please don't give sort of very literal definitions. Instead, you really want to be thinking, why has the writer written it in this way? What are they trying to convey through their use of language? Okay. And now, what you have all been waiting for, we get to the final question, question 3. This one is worth 25 marks. 15 of those are for how carefully and thoroughly you have read and shown that you have understood the passage, and 10 are available for the quality of your writing. So it is very important that you leave yourself enough time to answer this question properly. Okay, you do not want to be trying to rush this in the last sort of 15 minutes of the exam. There are lots of marks available. It requires careful, thoughtful planning. Now, you will remember, hopefully, that at the start of this video, I suggested that you bring with you 3 highlighter pens when you do this exam. And this question really is the reason why. Okay, and I'm going to explain a little bit now about that. So, here's what it says. You are the grandfather. Now, this is very important. This question will ask you to inhabit a character. Okay, and so what you are writing is all from the perspective of this character. Okay, so some years later, after this event has happened, you were interviewed about your memories of that night for a radio program about local history. The interviewer asks you the following 3 questions only. Okay, I'm not going to read them out, but you can see here what the 3 questions are. And this is where the highlighters come into play. And I really, really think that this is a vital part of your planning. You take one of the highlighters, let's say yellow, you highlight this top one. Then you take another highlighter, let's say your blue highlighter, you highlight this one, and then you take your pink highlighter, you highlight this third one, okay? And then you go to the text, and you start to pick out details from the text or parts of the text that are going to help you answer these questions from your perspective as the grandfather within the text. So you would first of all look for things that would help you answer this. What did you see and feel during your journeys through the city that night? You would go to the text, you'd think, okay, what can I highlight here? Just, launching straight into it. The hazy moon seemed to gather the silence up around it like a net. Not a sound, no sirens, no rats in the bin that lined the street. So what did you see and feel, well, you might talk about having noticed the silence, okay? And you might sort of think about some of the specific details as well that that help sort of emphasize that. You know, you might mention, for instance, the moon, and you might talk about the fact that there were no sirens or no rats in the bins that line the streets. Okay, because all these details help convey what you saw and felt. Okay, so you then do that for the second and third bullet points as well. So what you'd have by the end is a sort of, you know, beautifully coloured with three different highlighters extract. Okay, you don't want to obviously highlight the entire thing. You want to be quite selective with the information that you that you pick out. Okay, and let's look now at the mark scheme, because I think this is perhaps the best way to understand what is required here. So let's have a look at this. I'm going to zoom in a bit. So for the first bullet point, you're thinking about what you, as the grandfather, saw and felt during your journeys. Okay. So let's have a look at this one, because actually we talked about this. Okay. So the emptiness of the city, the fact that there was no one around. Okay, that's something you saw or observed. Okay, and then you would, as you are sort of writing this out in your own words, because obviously you can't just write empty, no one around. You want to sort of put it into the grandfather's voice. You know, I was astonished at the emptiness of the streets. I'd never seen it so quiet. It's normally a bustling city, something along those lines. You know, there was no traffic on the boulevard. For the first time, I noticed just how vast the street was, as it was so empty. And then you would give a sort of a development. Okay, so you've given the point that answers the question: what did you see or feel? Okay, you then give a detail to kind of bring it to life, to show that you've read the passage carefully and that you can sort of support that idea with some of the other information in the passage. So you've got your point, you've got your detail, and then you give a development. Now, a development is a thought, a feeling, or a consequence of the point and detail. Okay, so one way that you might choose to develop this is to say that it made the city feel a little bit soulless. Okay, that the complete emptiness and lack of people or traffic kind of took away a little bit of the kind of vibrancy that you normally associate with the city. Okay, equally, I suppose, you know, and I don't think it would be penalised, you could have gone the other way. You could say it was so tranquil and peaceful. For example, okay, so you've got to think, you know, what would the grandfather's likely attitude be? Okay, so that's the format. Let's look at one more. Okay, here, look, the sort of the silent or noiseless, the silence, the noiselessness of the place. Okay, and then you'd pick out one of the details, the fact that there were no sirens. And you can actually see this is in the text, not a sound, no sirens. Okay, so oops, sorry, wrong one. So that's your point, is that it's silent. Your detail might be that there are no sirens. Okay, so you'd sort of talk about that in a little bit more depth. You know, the fact that normally it's a main road and there are constantly sort of, you know, ambulances or police cars, whatever, going up and down, but now it was completely silent. And then you'd give your development. Okay, it gave a real sense of calm. You might say it made the city feel a little bit sort of eerie or mysterious. Okay, but you're giving a development, a thought, a feeling, or a consequence about this. Okay, so hopefully that format is quite clear. Now, you want to make sure that you are covering the bullet points very evenly as well, okay? And you want about 4 to 5 points per per bullet point. Okay, it doesn't have to be absolutely even, but you need to show that you've got a thorough range of different points for each of these 3 bullet points. Okay. Other things to consider. So first of all, you do need to use your own words throughout this. Secondly, you are getting marks for the quality of your writing. Okay, so the more interesting and vivid and authentically like the grandfather or the character in question it sounds, the better. Okay, so be creative, be imaginative, use, similes, metaphors. Equally, in terms of the punctuation that you use, accurately use a semicolon, accurately use a colon. Use a variety of different sentence types. You want your subclause and main clause and subclause, or the bracket comma sentence where you've got the start of the main clause, then the subclause, and then the end of the main clause. Really mix these things up as far as possible, because that will boost your writing mark. And two other things to say: use the passage, don't rewrite the passage. Okay, this is something that CIE are very, very strict on. If you are simply sort of writing out the passage, basically, that's no good. You need to sort of use the information in there, but you are writing something entirely new. You are the grandfather, and you are writing the words of an interview. Okay, and then the final thing to say, really, is that to get into the very top bands, you need to try to bring a little bit of subtlety or insight to your answer. And this can be a bit tricky, but most of the texts will have a sort of element to them that you can really incorporate in an interesting way. And in this one, I think it's really the sort of the wartime setting of the extract and of this experience with the elephant, because you can sort of say something along the lines, or you could say perhaps something along the lines of the fact that this experience felt even more meaningful and sort of intriguing because it was set against the backdrop of this awful war, and it was perhaps just this brief moment of kind of connection, even between the grandfather, granddaughter, and this sort of elephant, and the way that it sort of brought them together and gave them this sort of intriguing moment in an otherwise sort of quite unpleasant and harsh time. And just something like that gives your answer what I would call a kind of a ring of authenticity. Okay, it makes it sound real, as though it actually is an interview with somebody to whom this happened. So hopefully that's a useful guide to this question. I'm just going to quickly look down the mark scheme, and you can sort of pause the video if you like to see what they're saying. So all of these refer to the first bullet point. And then the second one, which is about the granddaughter's behaviours and reactions that night. And then the third one is sort of asking him about his reasons for taking his granddaughter out that night and looking back at what he thinks she gained from the experience. And this third bullet point, you can see here, will require probably the most inference, okay? Because the interviewer is asking you, as the grandfather, to look back and think what she gained from the experience. Now, obviously, there won't be anything in the text that specifically talks about that, okay? Because, we're now imagining that we are in the future and looking back. And so you have to really infer quite a lot. So, for instance, here, notices the sense of awe that was felt when she saw the elephant. You might add in the detail that this was the second time for him, so perhaps he wasn't quite as awestruck as she was at that point. And then you might develop it, thinking, well, what did she gain from the experience? Maybe it gave her a sense of wonder about nature. Maybe it's sort of this sort of triggered for her a kind of a deep love for the natural world and a sort of an obsession with elephants. For even for example, that might be something that as the grandfather you might imagine could have happened as a result of this. Okay, so remember this third bullet point will require the most amount of inference. Okay, hopefully that was a useful step-by-step guide to paper 1, which is the reading paper for your English language IGCSE. If anything is unclear, or if you have any questions or comments about anything that I've said or any part of this reading paper, just pop a comment underneath the video and we will try to answer your questions.